More, let's bring in CBS News national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Charlie, what's the reaction this hour there at the Pentagon to all of this?
Well, there hasn't been an official reaction from the Pentagon, and I don't think we can expect to see a reaction from the Pentagon, from the defense secretary on down. You know, this would be in keeping with the White House. The Pentagon is here, and the Defense Department is here at the White House's bidding, and the Trump administration's bidding. I think what we can add to the conversation is the amount of weaponry, the sophistication of the weaponry that the United States has been providing. I know that Major Garrett had already commented on the fact that there's been numbers thrown around $300 billion. It's far less than half that. Still a significant amount of money. But if the United States were to withdraw or to shut off that military aid, by the way, it should also be pointed out that a lot of that money goes right back into the U.S. military industrial base, you know, in terms of providing the weaponry. Most importantly, it will impact the artillery rounds. That's what Ukraine needs to continue fighting. And it's also, again, the sophistication of the weapons that the United States and this building provides in terms of the long-range weapons, the ATACMS and the precision weapons, the air defense systems. That is critical and vital. And that is something that will have an immediate impact on Ukraine if the United States were to withdraw its military support. You know, it has been said that the Europeans are going to step up. Prime Minister Starmer said that that would happen. But from Ukrainian officials, what they have said themselves is without U.S. support, they estimate that they can continue fighting for about 6 months. The fact of the matter is that they are outnumbered and outgunned by Russia in every meaningful metric. This has always been a war of attrition. If it were to be a war of attrition, it was one that President Putin would win. And I have to say, they'll be dancing in the halls of the Kremlin today. So this just came out from Deputy Chair Security Council Dmitry Medvedev. You may remember that name. He's been President, Prime Minister in the past. His words saying the insolent pig finally got a proper slapdown in the Oval Office. And Donald Trump is right. The Kyiv regime is gambling with World War III. That's just an indication of how this might be going down in Moscow today. And, you know, I was there. I was there in 2014, 2015. A lot of people think that the war began 3 years ago. This began more than 10 years ago with the annexation of the Donbass region by Russian-backed separatists. I was in Crimea. In the Donbass, when Donetsk fell, Luhansk fell, that has been territory that Russia had already claimed and then continued to advance. I mean, when there's a suggestion that this war was not started by Russia, I was in Kyiv. I was in the capital when the airstrikes began that morning. This is Russian aggression and containment. And this is going to be, I mean, it already is a European problem, far more than it is an American problem, but it is going to be an increasing problem for Europe if they are called in to either police whatever sort of negotiation may come out of this. I mean, it's anybody's guess what's going to happen now after what happened this afternoon. But Europe will have to take a lead role in this, and I think they're aware of that.
Okay, Charlie D'Agata, stay with me. I want to come back to you in just a moment. But first, let's bring in CBS News national security contributor Sam Vinograd. Sam, what does all this mean for security and safety in Ukraine and the European continent at large?
Well, if we look at the near-term issues here, Chanel, it is really, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but it is really an outstanding question as to whether President Trump continues the current level of U.S. security assistance to Ukraine. Keep in mind that in addition to the billions of dollars the United States has provided to Ukraine, there are also very important weapon systems that we've deployed to the region to provide for Ukraine's security, like anti-missile defenses known as Patriot batteries. We have also provided really critical intelligence and logistics support to Ukraine to counter Russian aggression. And based upon what transpired in the Oval, it is an outstanding question as to whether President Trump continues all of that. At the same time, if we think longer term, Putin likely now feels like he has an open door to continue his treacherous work within Ukraine and potentially to expand on that into other parts of Europe. in the months ahead. That is why, for Europeans, this is an existential crisis on their continent. They do not view Ukraine's sovereignty as charity work. They view it as providing for Ukraine and ultimately deterring Putin longer term. Americans historically have felt the same when it comes to Russian aggression. However, President Trump seems to think that Ukraine is a charity case rather than an important hedge against Russia.
And I wonder, Sam, what would happen if the U.S. got to a point where it said we're not supporting Ukraine anymore? Because you talked about some of the support that we're currently seeing on the ground. Would other European countries be able to bridge the gap there?
European countries have been scenario planning for this moment, unfortunately, since President Trump was elected. I say unfortunately because it's a very devastating conversation to have. However, I think it is unlikely that in a requisite and appropriate time frame, the Europeans could one-for-one backfill American support, both in terms of dollars as well as in terms of capabilities. The Europeans have said that they'll put forward a peacekeeping force. They have offered up a serious amount of money themselves to the Ukrainians as well as weapons. But I don't think that Europe is prepared or will be prepared in a short enough time frame to step in to fill the void created by the U.S. if we withdraw security assistance.
Okay, Sam Vinograd, thank you.
Thank you.
For more, want to go back to CBS News senior national security correspondent, that is Charlie D'Agata. Charlie, thanks for standing by with us. You mentioned a really important point there that you believe Ukraine may only have 6 months of fighting ahead if the U.S. were to pull support. I just wonder if there is a peace deal on the table going forward, what this event today may mean for what that deal would look like.
Well, I mean, it's anybody's guess. It's going to be unpredictable in the next sort of 24 hours as to where this is going to move forward, because both sides have got to come to some sort of agreement. And that's, I think, Imtiaz had pointed out in Kyiv earlier that Ukrainians woke up today with a sense of hope that some deal might have been achieved. There was already negotiation in place. The White House had suggested already that Ukraine would have to give up its hope of joining NATO. And I think, by and large, many Ukrainians were giving up on that hope, because this is exactly what President Putin was trying to avoid, is NATO expansion and having a NATO partner right along the border. That was one of his justifications for the war to begin with, was to thwart NATO expansion. So I think they were willing to sacrifice that. They will have to give up territory. The White House has already suggested that that was going to be part of a negotiation going forward. And again, I have to say that the Ukraine has already lost about 20%, which is huge. It's a big country. 20% of its territory is already occupied by Russia and Russian-backed forces. So I think if that was your starting point, that would be where the negotiations would begin. What is important to point out here, and as Sam had pointed out, I think the critical mass is the air defense systems. This isn't an offensive weapon in trying to retake and reclaim territory that Russia will have already taken, but this is to defend Ukrainian territory, and specifically, big targets like Kyiv itself, and to protect the people of Ukraine and the government and the infrastructure, et cetera. Where Ukraine has stepped up, they have started making their own artillery, and they're world leaders in drones, in attack drones. So, I mean, even the United States is looking at the sophistication and the technology and range of Ukrainian drones. And by and large, they have been very effective against Russian forces. So they would continue to work in that manner. But as Sam pointed out, when you have these European partners getting closer to the physical fight, if they were to have a sort of a peacekeeping force in Ukraine, well, that in itself posits them right next to Russian forces. And as we've seen in many areas, and I've personally witnessed around the globe, these ceasefires are fragile, and they can shatter at any moment. And then you have an opportunity where you've got Russian forces pitted against European forces, not just against Ukrainians themselves. So, we are at a very, very perilous and pivotal point in this conflict.
And speaking of how fragile this moment is and the prospect of a peace deal, there was some conversation about this inside the Oval Office. I want to play that sound for our viewers right now.
The problem is I've empowered you to be a tough guy. And I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States. And your people are very brave. But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but you'll fight it out. But you don't have the cards. But once we sign that deal, you're in a much better position. But you're not acting at all thankful. And that's not a nice thing.
And so, Charlie, based on your lengthy reporting inside Ukraine, I wonder how Russia is digesting this moment and how this could influence their strategy moving forward.
Yeah, well, you know, again, first of all, I've interviewed President Zelenskyy, and I know what kind of character he has, and I was watching that, and I was looking at his facial expressions because he has some control of the English language. Obviously, it's not his first language, but he understands almost everything. I could just see his facial expressions as he's sort of being berated by President Trump and JD Vance. And then he was able to, you know, communicate as well as he could with his control of the English language in arguing back. But he will be fired up. The people of Ukraine will be fired up and disheartened by what had happened. But the Russians will be celebrating. The Russian population, certainly the Russian government, President Putin, this plays right into his hands. And there are a great number of Russians who do support the war in Ukraine and do support President Putin. So they will be rallied by this. And again, you know, Ukrainians want this war to end more than anybody else. It may be that the Russians are tired of losing, you know, hundreds of thousands of their own fighting forces. They might want to see this brought to an end. But you know, the kind of language coming out of the White House will have crippled any kind of leverage and any kind of advantage that Kyiv may have thought they had going into today.
Okay, Charlie D'Agata, thanks so much.